Hello again, YouTube, and welcome back to Emergency Podcast. I'm Ian Bailey.
And I'm Nigel Goodwin.
And if you've been following us on some of the previous ones, you know that we're here to basically pick apart politics one crisis at a time and try and fix things by actually talking about the issues that matter. And what matters isn't the usual tittle-tattle about who said what, or Robert Jenrick accidentally filming lots of fare dodgers and other things like that. We've got bigger issues to talk about, haven't we?
I mean, yes, we do. Although that was that was a huge story, wasn't it? I mean, that was surely worthy of lots of front page headlines and and hours of commentary. But yeah. No.
The main takeaway that I took from it was that Robert Jenrick would very much like to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and please look at me.
Yep, he does, and I think we're okay with that. I think we're quite comfortable with the idea of him being the leader of the Conservative Party. I don't think he can do any better than Kemi Badenoch.
I think I really enjoyed some of the stuff circulating on social media that says that Bobby J is the obvious person to be lecturing all of us about proprietary, considering his own track record with things like the Great Expenses scandal or a certain dinner where he sat next to a certain person who a donation managed to get him off an absolute fortune in planning fees, that kind of proprietary. So I'm sure that Robert Jenrick is definitely the right kind of person. He definitely knows how much a can of grey paint costs when he's painting over Mickey Mouse in the asylum centre. So yeah, he's moral and upstanding.
Yeah, what he needs, ultimately what the Tories need is to get back to basics.
Oh,
Ian.
Yes.
That's what they need to do, because we know that works.
And you and I are sad and old enough to not only remember back to basics, but to actually enjoy the memory of it a little bit.
Absolutely.
Do you want to just touch on, just for everyone's entertainment, do you want to touch on just kind of an overview as to what was back to basics and why you've just mentioned it?
Yeah, I mean, and why it's so funny. I mean, so John Major became Prime Minister when when Maggie, God rest her soul, was ousted by her own party. Who'd have thunk it that kind of thing would happen in the Conservative Party? And look, the Tories have been in power for quite a long time, and there was all kinds of issues, underlying issues that were going on. There was lots of scandal, there were all kinds of other things going on. And John Major was trying to reset everything. He was trying to reset everything, particularly after market crashes and various other things that happened. He just wanted to, and they coined the phrase, as these politicians love to do, get back to basics. And it was a really broad concept around the Tories being strong and providing good governance, but also it was about things like family values and tradition, like getting back to the traditions that made Britain great and all this kind of stuff.
Like knocking up your mistress, as various Tory ministers were doing at the time.
Absolutely, and this was ultimately why it was doomed to fail, because the concept of a political party, first of all, lecturing people on traditional family values and talking about, well, hey, let's get back to basics after we've been in power already for 10, 12 years is laughable. But it didn't help that almost every single week, or maybe even every single day, there was a new scandal that broke from, was he the Chancellor at the time? There was stuff with Lamont, there was stuff with Mellor at the time.
David Mellor and the Chelsea kit.
Yeah, Chelsea kit. Yeah. Loads of. I mean, look it up. We definitely don't have time to go through it all, but definitely look it up. And if you can stumble upon it, there were some great spitting image episodes that covered this in brilliant satire.
We're showing our age, I'm afraid, talking about not just back to basics, but then the spitting image coverage of it.
People, hey, I'll tell you what, if we achieve one thing from doing these podcasts, it is that some people might go back and rediscover spitting image, because ultimately that was my introduction to politics. It's what got me into politics. We're missing it. But anyway, yes, we should move on.
We should. And I think back to basics, so as a phrase, might actually lead us to kind of what we want to talk about on this one, which is back to basics was Major pushing the big reset plunger on trying at least to push the big reset plunger on politics and saying, look, we've got to go back and rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it, and go back to old principles. There's a few things that we definitely think we need to do the same on in politics, and Farage made his speech about we're going to go and cut this and that, and now we've had Keir Starmer with his response, which basically seems to me, and it's not costed, you can't trust him, which I don't think's going to actually do what he thinks that he's going to do.
No, but because again, we've talked about people don't engage heavily with politics as it is. They hear little sound bites, and yes, Keir Starmer did a very big and, very pretty well written speech, but how many people saw that speech? How many people even saw clips from that speech? Yeah. It's going to be a very, very small minority. And so in terms of changing things, we all know, and everybody knows, that politicians argue amongst themselves over things. And if one person says, I'm going to do this, the other person says it won't work. And so, it really then does come down to who's got the momentum and is managing to get the ear of the, of the mainstream, of the media, and also of the people. And right now, it's Nigel Farage.
It is.
We can't get away from that.
And there's absolutely he is setting the agenda, I think. But that, in one way, is positive, if only in the way that people are now starting to talk about, well, here's what we need to do to change the country. And that, I think, is the back to basics that we can pivot onto, which is, well, so almost we are at the point of we need to start talking about what do we think and what's annoying us. And people seem to like angry politics now. I want to get angry about this and I'm going to go and change stuff. Well, I got a bit angry in the last one. You're going to be calmer than I was, but I know you've got one issue in particular that you want to float.
Yeah, and look, and I get angry about a whole load of stuff. I don't know if I'll get angry about this one, but I've been Mr. Sigh throughout all of this. My current places I sigh a lot, but I will get angry as we move through, I'm sure. But no, I really liked what you said on the last one we did, which was around the issues within the education sector, right? The fact that, look, it's not just about throwing money at a problem. Ultimately, a lot of the problems was that the money was not getting to frontline services, so because things have become too bureaucratic, things are getting in the way, and politicians love to talk about change. They all do it. If you want to be Prime Minister, if you want to lead the country, you're going to talk about how you're going to change the things that your predecessors have done. They're all doing it, but it is never that meaningful. Ultimately, it is just tinkering with the existing system. And what I really wanted to just touch on was the NHS. Right, so the NHS is, it's the biggie. Right, there's a whole load of things that we can talk about. There's a whole lot of things that cost money in this country. But the NHS is, well, first of all, you can't avoid it because every single one of us has to use it at some point.
Yeah.
And it is fundamental. It's critical to all of our lives, maybe not all the time, but at the most critical periods in our lives. I was doing a little bit of research on the NHS because there's always a lot of talk about the amount of money that's thrown at the NHS. Every government that has been in for the last however long talks about how when they're challenged on the problems in the NHS, when people talk about how bad things have got, their immediate response is, we're spending more on the NHS today than in any time in history. Yep. Rishi Sunak did it. Boris Johnson did it. Tony Blair did it. They all said, I'm sure Keir Starmer, it will become a stock phrase for him over the coming years. So throwing money at it clearly isn't solving the problem. And I just wanted to dig into a little bit why that is. And so a little question for you, Ian. What percentage of the budget, the NHS budget, goes on frontline services today, would you say?
Right. It's some outrageously low percentage. Like, I'm thinking high single digits, like 8% or something.
Well, it is actually quite significantly higher than that, but but it depends on. It depends on how you categorise frontline services, right?
Oh, okay.
If you're just talking doctors and nurses and the just the carers, effectively the ones who are administering the care, then yes, it's really low like that. But if you look at all of what you would call frontline, so doctors, nurses, the treatment that they get, the excuse me, the kind of other staffing costs as well, GPs, mental health services, ambulances, all that kind of stuff, that we would call frontline services. It's about 60%.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's higher than you thought, but again, 60%. That still means 40%. 40% of the money that goes in does not make it to what we would call patient care or patient well-being. Right?
Hang on. Also, though, in that money, because you said it includes doctors, nurses, and care, and all the rest of it. That will also, though, include the additional costs where you don't have sufficient staff, and then you're having to pay agency staff or cover staff or all of the rest of it.
Correct, absolutely, and that is so that number, that 60%, will almost certainly be even lower than that. But again, even if we just say it's 60%, that's 60% of 160 billion, something like that. So only a little bit more than half is actually going on patient care right now. Do you know what it was in the 1950s? When the NHS was brand new and lovely.
It's going to be the vast majority, and I think I know why it's going to be the vast majority. Go on, give us the percentage.
Yeah. 85% at a low level, probably. I mean, again, these numbers are obviously they're debatable and everything else, because a lot of time's gone by. But again, 85%. So in the last 80 years, it has dropped by a quarter. A quarter of the budget is going on other stuff.
Yeah.
And you and I know why a lot of this stuff is. The people out there, the people in the industry, and also the politicians know why a lot of this stuff is, but they're not doing anything necessarily about it because they've got caught into this is the way we do things. And you've touched on a little bit of the cost there. You've talked about when you can't get your hip replacement done on the NHS. It still gets done on the NHS because it's free at the point of use, but it might get done by a private hospital. And so we end up paying money to a private hospital to have that done.
I think there's even going past the where it's being done and the cost bit. It's that to go back in the old days, you've got big hospital that does practically everything, and then there'll be a bigger hospital that covers all of the rest of it, which are largely being managed. The whole stereotype about matron ruling like both the patients and the staff with a rod of iron was based on reality. But you've got something that's administratively relatively simple. Your hip replacement, you've got being referred now by a GP. So you've got the cost of a GP and a GP referral, and then going into a system and going into a queue, then to be able to go and maybe actually get an assessment as to, how bad is the hip? Do we actually need to replace it or whatever? That costs a load of money. Then back into another queue. I mean, so you end up where the administrative cost, before you actually get to the procedure itself, a hip replacement, is enormous. Plus, of course, the vast length of time that it takes, and leaving people in pain costs money as well, because then you have to treat the pain and whatever else.
Exactly. And so when you consider that, 40%, and it is probably more of that, more than that, 40% is being spent on other things. You're factoring in things like private providers. You're factoring in paying debt, paying off loans that every single NHS trust has. You're factoring in all the admin costs of everything, of multiple layers of things. And what was interesting when I was just reading up a little bit more on this is that you can actually track the decline in terms of the percentage that went to frontline services. Yeah. And there were 3 big drops, which he never recovered from. And those 3 drops were the reorganisation in 1973, 1974, massive reorganisation which introduced a lot of the regional, multiple layers.
So when you say the reorganisation, you're talking about actually the local government reorganisation, so creating things like metropolitan counties, like Greater Manchester, which then has the health board reorganised underneath it, yeah?
Yeah, that, and also the general, there was at the same time a wider reorganisation of the entire management of the National Health Service as well.
Right, okay, got it.
And again, obviously, we're talking NHS England here, as you pointed out the other day. There was the what was it called? The Health and Care Act in 2012.
The Lansley reforms.
Yep, Health and Care Act in 2012, and there was another one which I'm actually just trying to find because I've lost it. It was the internal market reforms in 1991.
That was I was thinking you were missing one.
You were thinking of that one. So in 2012, the 2012 continued that massive shift towards internal market reforms.
Now, hang on, before you go any further, you mentioned spitting image earlier and the bit of something has just jumped straight to my head when you said about the internal market reforms. Rory Bremner used to have Bremner, Bird and Fortune, the 3 of them doing his show, and Bird and Fortune would do these double headers where they're playing different roles for things. And they did this one after the internal market reforms where one of them is the procurement manager for his local NHS hospital. And he's going on about being paid a fabulous amount of money to go and procure scalpels for the surgeons. And before, we had this really inefficient system where you've got the local provider who would just send them in boxes. Well, maybe that's not what the doctors want. Maybe they want something else. So my job, is basically to roam the country, going and finding other providers and different. And it's literally the internal market thing was, if I've got to go, 500 miles up the country to get a scalpel to save 2p a scalpel, then I'll do that. And of course, I'm being paid a fortune. Yeah, it's.
So that, and again, that is the perfect example of the three things I've mentioned there. The reorganization in the 70s, the 1990s internal market introduction, and the 2012 Health and Social Care Act. All those three things have one thing in common. Not any of them are actually related to helping frontline services and care. They might say that that's what they're about, but ultimately they're just about introducing layers of management, layers of bureaucracy, with the vision of, well, this is very messy and very hard to manage, so we're going to introduce some new things to make it easier. But it doesn't. It just leads to inefficiency.
Well, the last one, the Lansley reform. So that created the clinical commissioning groups. So you then have you're basically creating, instead of having a GP and you've got a general practitioner who is a doctor, so you go and see the doctor, my hip hurts, it might need replacing. Now you're organizing doctors into these clinical commissioning groups who are then going and purchasing blocks of care from different bits within the NHS at a market competitive rate. So you've got different elements within the NHS basically all bidding to win service, plus of course all of the private sector providers who are then able to come in and all the rest of it. So you've got GPs, instead of poking at your hip and you saying ow, not bothering with patients, instead they're managers and they're purchasing managers and all of this nonsense. It must cost an absolute fortune.
Absolutely, and this is the big thing that inevitably gets a lot of people angry, because ultimately it's not working. Something now is fundamentally broken. And look, I have a little bit of sympathy for politicians when it comes to the NHS, a little bit, because the NHS has become this, I don't know what you'd even describe it, it is an institution, right? It's a
religion,
British institution. Yeah, it's like a religion in that. I mean, look, I still consider it probably the greatest creation in Britain in the 20th century for Britain. It was a phenomenal achievement what happened to create the NHS, and it's a wonderful institution. I'm doing it myself now. It's a wonderful thing. It's this incredible British institution, and because of that opinion, politicians are petrified of actually saying it's broken.
But it is broken.
And saying it's broken and we need to fundamentally reform the National Health Service. And indeed, Wes Streeting, who is I'm not a massive fan of Wes Streeting, if I'm honest with you, but he came out and he said, look, we've got some big problems here and we need to fix it. And he got hammered from all sides for daring to question the NHS. Now, he wasn't saying let's get rid of the NHS and replace it with an entirely private healthcare system, but just mentioning that it needed reform has caused all kinds of problems for him. And so I do get it, and there is a little bit of sympathy there, but we just have to admit it. The NHS right now, in its current form, is not fit for purpose. It is not working for ordinary people. And it doesn't mean we want to replace it with something that you have to spend loads of money on, or we have to spend money on, but it does need replacing with something that's fit for the 21st.
But this is then where the solution isn't another set of reforms, right? The solution, right? So you had the internal market reforms, and then when Tony Blair came in, you had was it Alan Milburn, who was the health secretary? He changed some of the internal market reforms, and some of them actually removed the competition. Others entrenched it even further. And then obviously you've gone further along, and then the lands. What is needed now isn't another set of reforms.
No,
right?
It's to start again.
You've got to start again. And I think this is the place now where what we're going to lovingly refer to a lot on this channel, which is the blank sheet of paper approach. Don't be bound by what you've got. Start with a sheet of paper with nothing on it. What do we want? What are we trying to achieve? What we're not going to do is say, well, if we freed up 20% or 22%, it'll be some weird number of GPs who are currently commissioning managers, and put them back into this, then we might be able to do that, and that saves $3 billion. No. Yeah. It's all twisted and knotted together to the point of madness. You need to step all the way back. And can I give one example as to the starting place for some of this? You hear all of this stuff about PFI hospitals, and even now, hospitals and surgeries and all the rest of it that have been put on PFI schemes both under Tony Blair's time and David Cameron's. Because remember that George Osborne, having attacked PFI when he was the Shadow Chancellor, came in and accelerated PFI to record levels as Chancellor, because it's just a nice, cheap way of doing things. So you've got an investment company who basically has built a hospital, and it's not necessarily built it very well, because a lot of these have got problems. But it has built a hospital, and you have got a contract that says that it's going to cost you £704 to change the light bulb, because that's what we've enshrined in the contract, right? So if you basically renege on the contract and say we're going to rip this up and we're going to replace it with something else, and they say no, well, what else are they going to do with the building? They're not going to let it to Greggs, right, or IKEA, or put a branch of Tesco in there. It's a hospital, so all it can be is a hospital. And frankly, if they get arsey with it, that's the point where it's like, well, sorry, we're going to effectively requisition this. Here's your contract. You've lived it large for ages. Congratulations, we're now going to completely change the terms, and if you don't like it, you don't really have a choice, because you're still making money off it anyway. As a base point, get rid of all of the debt, because you mentioned debt. A lot of this is debt that's been tied up. All of the debt's gone. The facilities are here for us to use. And that is something that, again, they've been talking about PFI for decades as being a problem. Well, the obvious thing is, in the private sector, if a contract isn't working, it gets renegotiated, right? Renegotiate the contract, guys. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, and this is a classic problem of government, right? Getting fleeced by private organisations,
but allowing itself to be fleeced.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And look, there's no reason why governments can't lawyer up as well. You know, there are ways to solve this stuff, and ultimately, they are the government. There are all kinds of things that they can put in place for all these eventualities. They've just, and again, they're doing it the kind of the slow and classic Keir Starmer way, but they are renationalising the railways, right? It's like, yes, it is happening, but it's not. He could have done it on day one. He could have just torn up those contracts and brought it in, but it would have cost more money, right? And so that is that I understand why he didn't do that. But there are always ways for governments to make changes. They are the government. Yeah. They literally are the lawmakers in the land, so they can make changes. But I think, and look, I realise we've talked quite a bit there about the NHS, but I think ultimately it's because it is so important.
Well, sorry. No, I was going to say, look, in essence, what we're saying is, right, it's not about spend ever-increasing amounts of money, because there's no point pouring more money in the top if it's not getting through to the bottom. What we're saying is that we're spending the money on the wrong things in the wrong places. Yeah. So there's no point spending 100% if only 60% of it is actually going to the place where it needs to. To get to 62%, you don't tip more at the top, you just redirect what you're doing.
No, exactly. And none of this should cause people to lose their minds over the idea that you are destroying this great British institution. The reality is that, again, you start with your blank sheet of paper. No one's saying that the nurses don't work hard, the doctors don't work hard, and
of course,
the level of care that they provide when you can get to them is not phenomenal. It genuinely is, and we've all, as you get older, you have no choice but to go to hospital sometimes, and it's fantastic. It genuinely is for the amount of money that's spent per person. It's a phenomenal service, but it's not working right now, and it's not going to get any better just by throwing a bit of money of it. No matter how much growth Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves actually managed to create, they could throw another 20-30 billion at it per year. It will not fix.
Well, they have. If you go back 5 years, they have. I mean, like, the money keeps increasing, and yet it's literally a crisis point at the front line. But while you're rethinking and reimagining it, it's say the NHS basically, because they used to talk about, it's there to support you from the cradle to the grave and all the rest of it. Well, okay, so let's start at the cradle. Integrate things like Sure Start, which should never have been axed and was shameful. Start investing in preventative healthcare from the very beginning, right? Because the healthier we are, the less money needs to be spent keeping us alive. And that's the basic thing. They've cut all the preventative stuff because we can't afford it, but that just makes people sicker, which costs more money.
This feeds in brilliantly into that idea of the industries for the country, right? I think I've touched on this with you before about the idea of Silicon Valley being where it is was not preordained. It wasn't fated. It just happened. If anyone ever gets a chance to go out there, it's just a part of America that 50, 60 years ago was a bunch of farms. That's it. But the American government, the state of California, the investors, that they made it appealing to build organizations there, to build out an industry, and now it's one of the richest parts of the planet because of that, and it has created the entire tech industry. Ultimately, there is no reason why the industries of tomorrow or today cannot be somewhere in the UK, but it has to have the right approach.
But also, let's take an American example. So the American healthcare system, terrible as it is in a lot of things, gets quite a few things right, and one of them is university teaching hospitals. So we, because of the way that we both have tried to cut the funding for training of new doctors, medics, nurses, whatever, and the way that we then treat them inside the NHS, we've got a shortage, which is why we've got to keep bringing migrants in from the second and third world, which isn't great for those countries. And then you end up with your fragmented care and hospital buildings that are built where they are because, that's where it is and it's crumbling. Let's have an argument between this town and that town as to where the new teaching hospital is going to get to. Hang on a second. What we need to both train the medical staff. We also need to come up with new ways of keeping people healthy and doing treatments and having to go at curing cancer and all of the other things. So combine all of them together into you have got a campus where you are teaching people on the fly in the hospital, which is there. The Americans are very good at this, and we have a few, but we only have a few, and it's a way of trying to harness some of the issues that we've got with higher education, where there's a lack of funding and a lack of support and through thinking, with what is the NHS trying to do. And I just think this is an obvious one of those things where at the moment they're sat in separate budgets and separate departments and separate politicians. Hang on, guys. Stop and think.
It's a really good example, and one of the reasons I mention things like industry as well is you talked about preventative medicine, you talked about preventative care, right? We are seeing this immense move towards AI and machine learning and everything else, and all that. One of the biggest applications of that is around healthcare and preventative medicine. And the investment. If the investment was made today by the British government to make Britain one of the homes of AI-fronted preventative healthcare, then not only does that help the health of the nation, not only does that help cut down waiting lists in hospitals and everything else, because things are moving better and prevent everyone having to go to the doctors, but it creates other jobs, right? It's all about that bit where everything's interlinked. If you're willing to invest in the industry now, because the healthcare industry has gone through massive reform over the years, just through technology, it will continue. It will accelerate even more now. And the choice we have as a country is we can go buy it from abroad, which is what we will be doing. We'll be buying a lot of this technology from abroad, which again increases the budget, it decreases the amount of money that's actually going to frontline services, or we can build it ourselves, by creating that industry, investing in that industry today. And those are the kinds of, when we talk about fundamental change, those are the kind of changes that the big ideas that need to be done.
Can we pivot on that, just briefly off that, onto principles as well? And we probably need to start wrapping this up. But right, so you've got we've got to start thinking big and harnessing the new technologies and the new innovations. Absolutely. But the principle that we've got in the current NHS that we need to replace with new NHS is that it's marketized and it's market principles and it's market this and whatever else. And that only really serves to wind people up, I think, right? So they aren't going to want to engage with your new AI-led keeping health future thing, because the way it's set up at the moment, they feel like they're going to be set up to be exploited by it, because the system is there to basically make a profit from them. And the one that you're into there's always got to be a few token things that can be thrown out there while you're involved in the change. And here's the biggie. And it's only when I moved to Scotland that I suddenly realised that this was even a thing. Abolish parking charges at hospitals. And that's not how do you fund that? Well, hang on a second. It's there because you've got, this NHS Health Trust, Hospital Trust business thing as a business. And we've got to go out there and make a load of money. And our car park's here in this town and the other commercial car parks charge, and we're going to charge as well. Guys, you're a hospital, you're a medical facility, you're not commercial. If you scrap the need to be commercial, then yes, congratulations, your car park charge is gone. And, you know, I go to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, there's a massive, great big car park, and it's free, right? There is no charge for it. If you did the same thing in England, it'd be, you know, you're paying by the hour and how many hours do I need to put in. But you're not just scrapping the charge, which people would like. You're scrapping the entire ethos behind the fact that it's market competitive. It's not about being competitive. It's about being preventative, about keeping people healthy and stopping them being ill and then treating them where you need to. So that ethos change needs to be dialed in from the very top. And then everything else kind of flows off it. And you're right, there are new technologies and innovations and things that we can do within it. But there's a large chunk of it, which is how much time and money and effort can we save if we stop having GPs managing contracts and going out there and commissioning scalpels from wherever, and actually going out there thinking, hey, let's do medicine.
Yeah. And you know, and a really good, just to kind of close on that piece about, you know, about doctors sorting out contracts and everything else, but the supply thing, you know, when you look at COVID, you know, the PPE situation, this is what happens when you don't actually have. Now, they would argue it's like, hey, look, we've got this internal market, which means that everyone can be competitive. But when a crisis truly hits, it was not fit for purpose. It could not actually deliver what was needed. And so the government of the time had to go out and try and get a whole load of contracts in place to provide, you know, safety equipment for the people who are risking their lives. Basic safety equipment. And, you know, we've all seen the pictures and everything else, and of course we're now seeing the amount of money that was wasted, squandered during that period. That would not have happened if there had been a centralised contract across all of these things.
And people say centralised is bad, but hang on a second. This is like in an actual free market, centralised purchasing happens all the time, and consolidating things together to make them cheaper. This happens all the time because this is how you operate it that is most efficient. The more units you buy, the cheaper you can get them.
Exactly.
So if the NHS is buying, you know, like a million face masks or 5 million face masks, that surely has got to be better to be done centrally than instead of having 45 separate trusts trying to buy 30,000 each. Of course they're going to get fleeced, and the cost of providing them is higher because exactly the same as with education, all these different touch points, all of these different contracts, all of this, no, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this is why, look, I'm a context-driven person, right? It's like, it's all about the context. Some stuff, it makes sense to have a market. It makes sense to have competition. You mentioned the other day, globalization is not a bad thing. You know, ultimately, capitalism is not a bad thing. But ultimately, it is about context. And certain things, it makes more sense to be centralized, and certain things, it makes more sense to be local or regionalized. It depends on the context.
Yeah.
And with something like when you're buying lots of stuff, just do one contract and get it, and then deal with the logistics of making sure it's shipped to the right places. It's not not rocket science.
Exactly. You know, you're then into all you're doing then is Tesco moves cans of beans around, right? It buys Heinz beans from Heinz, one supplier, and then sends it to literally the entire country. Yeah. There is no reason why NHS procurement can't do, instead of beans, it's buying face masks, but it's the same thing. We're going to send them all over the country, and they've got the vans and all of the rest of it. It's just that they're not thinking that way because they've been told, oh, you can't possibly do it that way because it's communist. But what we're going to do is we're going to marketize it. It's the starting again bit, which is going back to the basic principles, which is what are we here to do? How can I put it? Everyone's happier when they're healthy, and as a nation, we prosper more when people are healthy and they're able to contribute more. So if that's the principle of it, then how you would organise it if you were starting now is not what we have today. And if what you've got today isn't what you would create when you're starting off doing it, then don't accept that that's the only way you can possibly do it, because we didn't start here. We don't have to stay here. It just takes the political will to actually say the unthinkable things, which is the NHS isn't perfect, and we can make wholesale changes to make it better.
Yeah. Exactly. And that feeds back into, hope rather than fear, right?
Yeah.
It's like we don't have to be driven by the fear of something or fear of something going wrong. We can be driven by the hope of it being better, of it being greater than it was before. Not to sound too much like Donald Trump, but but again, and I realize we are, as always, well over time. But I think now that we've kind of set that up, it would be great to start getting those blank sheets of paper out.
There are so many blank sheets of paper that are needed, my friend, so many. And the whole point is, hopefully, as people start watching these, they start thinking, hey, there's some ideas there, right? And this is the point. It's about ideas, because I think we need to assist our politician friends, because they're just, and we've seen this, you can change the government, but they're trapped by the same "we have to do it this way because we do" mentality, and we've got to get away from that. Otherwise, we are going to get, someone like Farage who doesn't care, right? And voters, frankly, don't understand and don't care. And it's not criticising them to say they don't understand. I don't know most of the detail of this, but I understand some things, and other people will understand some things, and we just get people together where, hey, here's what we can do. It's asking different people the same questions, rather than the Treasury Green Book or whatever it is you said earlier.
Exactly, completely, and that is the idea. Being radical is not something to be afraid of. No. I understand why some politicians are afraid of it, but the best times in British history, in my mind, have actually been when we've been up against the wall and we've been radical in our approach.
Yep.
We don't have to touch on all of those things, but that is what really matters. We're up against the wall right now as a nation. We need to be radical. It's as simple.
And just as a closing note on this, we can't stress this enough, right? There's this argument about, do you want to say the country's broken because aren't you playing into Nigel Farage's hands? No, denying that the country's broken plays into Nigel Farage's hands, right? It's obviously, patently, demonstrably broken, and we've got to fix it.
Yeah. 100%, 100%. And on that note, it's Friday evening. I think there's beers that we would all like to open at this stage. So it's probably time for us to call it a day. We'll be back. We will be back in the next few days with something else, with some blank sheets of paper. But again, if you've liked what we've done, subscribe, do all of those things. Please go back and watch some of our other ones as well, because because otherwise it's just us talking to ourselves.
Which we're very good at,
which we quite enjoy, to be fair, and we could keep going. But no, please do, and tell your friends. And watch Spitting Image as well.
Yes, and we'll see you on the next one.
Awesome. See you soon.